The tipping point. How little things can make a big difference. The tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell. Chapter 2. The law of the few. Connectors, mavens, and salesmen. On the afternoon on April 18th, 1775, a young boy who worked at a livery stable in Boston overheard one British Army officer say to another something about hell to pay tomorrow. The stable boy ran with the news to Boston's North End, to the home of a silversmith named Paul Revere. Revere listened gravely. This was not the first rumor to come his way that day. Earlier, he had been told of an unusual number of British officers gathered on Boston's Long Wharf, talking in low tones. British crewmen had been spotted scurrying about in the boat tethered beneath the HMS Somerset and the HMS Vaughan in Boston Harbor. Several other sailors were seen on shore that morning, running what appeared to last-minute errand. As the afternoon wore on, Revere and his close friend Joseph Warren became more and more convinced that the British were about to make the major move that had long been rumored, to march to the town of Lexington, northwest of Boston, to arrest the colonial leader John Hancock and Samuel Adams, and then on to the town of Concord to seize the stores of the guns and ammunition that some of the local colonial militia had stored there. What happened next has become part of historical legend, a tale told every American school child. At 10 o'clock that night, Warren and Revere met. They decided they had to warn the communities surrounding Boston that the British were on their way so that local militia could be roused to meet them. Revere was spirited across Boston Harbor to the ferry landing at Charlestown. He jumped on a horse and began his midnight ride to Lexington. In 2 hours, he covered 13 miles. In every town he passed through along the way, Charlestown, Medford, North Cambridge, Monotony, he knocked on doors and spread the word, telling local colonial leaders of the oncoming British and telling them to spread the word to others. Church bells started ringing. Drums started beating. The news spread like a virus, and those informed by Paul Revere sent out riders of their own, until alarms were going off throughout the entire region. The word was in Lincoln, Massachusetts by 1 a.m., in Sudbury by 3, in Ottawa 40 miles northwest of Boston by 5 a.m., and by 9 in the morning had reached as far west of Ashby near Worcester. When the British finally began their march toward Lexington on the morning of the 19th, their foray into the countryside was met, to their utter astonishment, with organized and fierce resistance. In Concord that day, the British were confronted and soundly beaten by the colonial militia, and from that exchange came the war known as the American Revolution. Paul Revere's rider is perhaps the most famous historical example of a word-of-mouth epidemic. A piece of extraordinary news traveled a long distance in a very short time, mobilizing an entire region to arms. Not all word-of-mouth epidemics are this sensational, of course, but it's safe to say that word-of-mouth is, even in this age of mass communication and multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, still the most important form of human communication. Think for a moment about the last expensive restaurant you went, the last expensive piece of clothing you bought, and the last movie you saw. In how many of those cases was your decision about how to spend your money heavily influenced by the recommendation of a friend? There are plenty of advertising executives who think that precisely because of the sheer ubiquity of marketing effort these days, word-of-mouth appeals have become the only kind of persuasion that most of us respond to anymore. But for all that, word-of-mouth remains very mysterious. People pass all kinds of information to each other all the time. But it's only in the rare instance that such an exchange ignites a word-of-mouth epidemic. There is a small restaurant in my neighborhood that I love, and that I've been telling my friends about for 6 months, but it's still half empty. My endorsement clearly isn't enough to start a word-of-mouth epidemic. Yet there are restaurants that, to my mind, aren't any better than the one in my neighborhood that open and, in a matter of weeks, are turning customers away. Why is it that some ideas and trends are message tip and others don't? In the case of Paul Revere's side, the answer to this seems easy. Revere was carrying a sensational piece of news. British were coming. But if you look closely at the events at that evening, the explanation doesn't solve the riddle either. At the same time that Revere began his ride north and west of Boston, a fellow revolutionary, a tenor by the name of William Doe, set out on the same urgent errand, working his way to Lexington by the town west of Boston. He was carrying the identical message through just as many towns, over just as many miles as Paul Revere. But those rides didn't set the countryside afire. The local militia leaders weren't alerted. In fact, so few men from one of the main towns he rode through, Waltham, for the following day, that some subsequent historians conclude that it must have been a strongly pro-British community. It wasn't. The people of Waltham just didn't find out the British were coming until it was too late. If it were only the news itself that mattered in a word-of-mouth epidemic, those would now be as famous as Paul Revere. He isn't. So why did Revere succeed where others failed? The answer is that the success of any kind of social epidemic is heavily depends on the involvement of people within a particular and rare set of social gifts. Revere's news tipped, and those didn't because of the difference between the two men. This is the laws of the few, which I briefly outlined in the previous chapter, but there I only gave example of the kind of people highly promiscuous, sexually predatory, who are critically to epidemics of sexually transmitted disease. This chapter is about the people who critical to social epidemics and what makes someone like Paul Revere different from someone like William Dawes. These kind of people are all around us, yet we often fail to give them proper credit for the role they play in our lives. I call them connectors, mavens, and salesmen.